Welcome to Service API's meeting for October 8th. Thanks to everyone for showing up. We've got a release candidate that went out yesterday and some great questions around it. So yesterday we got James PR in. Thanks for the quick reviews around that. And I tried to release this with some kind of note that this was still a work in progress, but I think any maintainer can change or edit this as they see fit. I don't imagine, this project has mostly flown under the radar, so I can't imagine this getting much pickup beyond people who might be interested in implementing this API. But James added some great questions to the agenda that I think would be good to cover, including what the commitment is around the RC1, and if we're going to make any changes, or especially breaking changes for RC2, and how we transition from RC to a full release. I have my own perspective on this. Maybe I'll start there, but I'm very interested in what others think as well. My perspective here is that this release candidate is intended to be a reasonable way for people who are interested in implementing this API, as we're getting super close to alpha, to pin to some meaningful target before we actually get the V1 Alpha 1 release out. I think since we've reached RC1, I don't imagine we're going to have any huge shifting changes, like we're not going to completely restructure our API. But I do imagine that it's still possible to make minor tweaks, revisions, or additions. So things such as, a slight rename of a field. To me, I think that's still acceptable, but I'm open to what others think. That had been my perspective on what an release candidate is, especially a release candidate for an initial alpha of an API. But I am very open to what others think.
So, can you hear me?
Yep.
Cool. I'll just give you a little bit of background here. I didn't really read the release note too closely, and so I posted the link around internally, and I'm like, "Yay, we have a release! We have a release!" And my assumption was that it was the V1 Alpha 1 release, and then I got questions about what's a release candidate, and I didn't quite know how to answer those.
Yeah, that's fair, and we didn't document it very well, or at all, and so I should probably add that, if nowhere else, to the release note itself here. My idea was that this is, again, kind of close enough that implementations could start working against this API, with the understanding that things can and will still change, at least slightly, between now and a V1 Alpha 1 release. But that, I think Bowie added in chat, hopefully no new features and no major restructuring, which I think that's kind of the balance I had envisioned here. Our whole project here is an API, so it's kind of difficult to do a pre-release that doesn't allow for changes in the API itself. But I would hope and think that those should be minor in scope. But this could be a sign of anyone who's interested in implementing this API. This is probably a good starting point. I think it would be reasonable. I should really write this down again in this note, is I think it would be reasonable to say that any further releases after this point will include a change log. which is something that we have not done up to this point. I don't know, does that seem like a reasonable balance here?
I suppose so. It feels like it opens us up to API ambiguity again. And I think we had this discussion on previous calls where people were interested in implementing V1 Alpha 1, but also were worried about the stability of the API. So that releasing an RC1 which isn't uniquely identified by API version seems like we have that same problem. Do people think that's a problem, or is it just we'll just commit to making the on the wire API compatible for all the RC series?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, unfortunately, because if the API group type, we keep changing it, I don't know if that's great. Like, if you're writing code and you're constantly having to re-vendor entire directories of generated code, you might as well not cut these RCs. Does that make sense? Because it's like, it's kind of baked into a lot of stuff. You're saying like it should be like V1 Alpha 1 dash RC1.
Well, I guess that's my question, because if someone implements V1 Alpha 1 RC1 and then we change a bunch of stuff and then you run in a cluster with V1 Alpha 1 RC2, what do they do? Are we going to be careful about changes so that they can gracefully work with that, or would they just be broken?
Yeah, I guess you're pointing out the weaknesses of this RC thing. I was just using it as like sort of like a kick for ourselves to get it into a shape where we can cut the alpha, and we start cutting proposed alpha points where we can basically say from now on we're basically trying to stabilize it towards the alpha. Maybe we could have used a different word as RC, although that's the one that came to mind because it is technically a candidate for a release, and we're trying to work towards stabilizing. James, do you have users who are consuming it and going to be pinning to RC1?
We have an internal project which is kind of tracking it. So I think that if we kind of clarified what we mean by RC along the lines that you just described, I think that would be pretty helpful for them, because I think what we mean by RC is it's in a state that we feel implementers can start tackling it, but no one should yet ship a product until the final V1 Alpha 1 release. Is that what?
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, that's precisely right.
That's a that's a great way of summarizing my perspective on this as well. Is just I view this as a pre-release, and a pre-release that's targeted not as users of the API, but at implementers of this API.
Okay, that makes sense. I'll just add a sentence to the release notes just to clarify, and
yeah, that'd be great.
If people want to edit that to make, to keep on just editing that until we get consensus, I think that'd be helpful.
Great, sounds good. Yeah, thanks for calling that out. I know there was definitely some reasonable confusion around what an RC should mean here. But yeah, cool. And hopefully, I think while we're talking about release candidates, we should talk about maybe what kind of sequence, what kind of, how often we want to release an RC, and how quickly we might achieve alpha, because well, not to skip too far ahead, but if you look at our milestone here, we are making what feels like relatively rapid progress here, so that the vast majority of things we have left are, either documentation, which we should definitely get in, or little bits of rename or cleanup type things. Or in this case, validation. I had thought that it might be good to plan on releasing another RC in somewhere between 10 days and a week and 2 weeks. So between 10 and 14 days from our first RC. And then if we are reasonably happy with that RC, proceed to a V1 Alpha 1 release very shortly after that. I don't know if that's a reasonable timeline to everyone else. I know we still do have a number of issues here, but the list is certainly dwindling. So, and just,
Well, that sounds good to me.
Cool, great, thank you. And I think the follow-up to that is James' question here of how do we define when we graduate from an RC to a full release? I am hopeful that our next RC can be generally API complete. And maybe we can let that soak for just a few days, give people a chance to play with it, poke at it, make sure we haven't missed things, and then graduate to V1 Alpha 1 from there. That had been my perspective on this. I know I've had other months in mind before, but it sure does feel possible that we could actually get something out in October. And so if you say we get another RC out, not this following week, but early in the week after that, and then an alpha shortly after that, that hopefully would have no changes in between the final RC and an alpha. Maybe that's a reasonable timeline here. I don't know. I'm going to take the lack of feedback as everyone agrees fully with me. So yes, thanks, Bowie. And so with that, I think we're set on RC and potential timeline here. If anyone else wants to push for something different, definitely let me know, put it in Slack or Zoom or wherever. With that said, let's take a little bit of time and go through this milestone. I know Harry has volunteered to take this one on. I don't think he's here today, so I'll just ping him. On this one. For documenting TLS configuration, unless there are any volunteers, I am tempted to ask Harry to take this on since he's done so much of the work around TLS. So let me just do that now. And then finally, the user guide or documentation. I think Mark was working on something here, so I can ask him. Let me just CC him for now. examples for documentation. Bowie, you had volunteered for this one. Does that still feel like something like you're able to take on?
Yeah, I'm still working on that.
Okay, great. FAQs. Is anyone interested in taking this one?
Yeah, I can take it. I'll
Awesome,
start
thanks.
structure, and I can use it to add the FAQ for how do I add my own custom extensions to
Oh,
service
yeah,
APIs.
that would be awesome. Great.
Two birds, one stone.
Yes, perfect. Okay, path header match order documentation. I think this may be, does anyone here want to take this one on? I'm tempted to say this might be something like Harry could help with.
I'd be happy to look at it. I guess I was just not
Okay.
just in reading it there. I wasn't sure what it was, but I can follow up with Harry. I'll find too to find out. So yeah,
I forget your is this is you,
there
right?
it is.
Cool.
Yep, runner. Thanks.
All right. Let's go down the list. Regex support for path and header matching. And Harry has volunteered for this one. I'll just ping him. My typing skills get immeasurably worse when I'm screen sharing. Something about it. All right. The standardized selector fields in the API is also a good one that, yeah, Harry has volunteered for a lot of these. I'm going to, I know I'd also been involved, I've been involved in a lot of these selectors too, so I'm going to help out with this one. Type aliases resolve too aggressively in the generated documentation. I remember this. We have a few less type aliases now, but I think we still have this problem, right, James?
Yeah, I think so. But I'm not sure that there's much we can do about it. So I don't. I think the most likely thing is we'll get to the end of the release and then just bump this off the next one.
I'm going to, I know this is a potential solution. I don't know if it's going to make a difference, but if anyone wants to volunteer to try it out and see if it does, could be worthwhile. Because
Rob, you can assign that to me. I'll just do that real quick.
Okay.
Yeah, there's another related issue with documentation that I think Gabe put a PR in for, which is that the documentation generator doesn't do anything with named constants, which is kind of unfortunate because we have a bunch of places where we use the go string enum pattern, and we attach documentation to certain constants, which is useful, but you can't get it from the website. You can only get it from the from the Go doc or from the Go files itself. So not quite sure what to do about that one either.
Yeah, that is frustrating, and we don't have that many PRs, so I'll just pull that one up real quick. This is one that I think you had pointed out. The same documentation appears below here, but it's not obvious because yeah, it's
Yeah,
not clear in any
those
of the,
consts just get ignored.
yeah.
I'll probably look at it maybe today, but it's possible that in the Go templating, the constant values are like available somewhere, but I don't think
Oh
they
yeah,
are.
yeah.
I'm not sure what happens to, does this kind of thing get documented with the official Kubernetes API documentation generator?
You would hope so because we use these all over the place. But I don't actually know. I spend all my time just looking straight at the Go types, which
Right,
is
so do
not
I.
always good. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. Okay. Yeah, I'll leave that for now then. And we're on to gateway and gateway class relationship. I think this is changed to a kind documentation. I've added this to V1 Alpha 1 milestone. It would be good to clarify. We've had a lot of discussions about the difference between gateway and gateway class. Does anyone feel especially qualified to answer this in the form of documentation?
It does feel like a FAQ. So I guess I'm responsible for creating the FAQ entry, but I don't know if I want to put my hand up for filling it out.
Okay, well, I'll take this one and CC you. I've written at least some things around this and been involved in some of the discussion. I don't know that my first attempt at differentiating this will be perfect, but I can give it a first go. Okay, and the next one, yeah, this is a really tiny one. I think I may turn this into a PR, but I also don't have to because this would involve renaming fields. And I don't know if we have the appetite for that. I think that this is a relatively minor change. This would involve a transition from route namespaces.
This is the time to do it, Rob. If you're going to do it, then do it now.
Yeah. So this is, we have routes.route namespaces and routes.route selector, and it could be argued that this is just too repetitive and we could get rid of the route prefix here. I think that's probably a reasonable thing to do here. So I've kind of suggested what that might look like. This one gets a little funky. Does anyone not like this idea? Would anyone prefer we just don't touch this and leave it as is? Okay, I'm going to assign this to myself then, and I'll do a PR, and feel free to comment or leave feedback that maybe we shouldn't take this on, but it seems like a pretty straightforward, clean up PR. And I think we're down to the last one here. Harry, you raised this issue. We've discussed this elsewhere. Do we want to have extension points in route match? Harry, do you want to give a little bit more feedback?
Yeah, so currently in HTTP route, we have path-based matching and header-based matching, and then an extension point. In TCP, TLS, and UDP routes, we only have an extension ref. Now, the point, like when I was actually using the extension ref, it turns out, so you can define a route, and then the matching criteria has to live in a different CRD, right? So is that something that we want to support in the API, or do we recommend authors create like, HTTP route or, X route like APIs under this, which are very similar in structure and behavior as in service APIs. So that was my conundrum. So that's why I opened this up. Um, like having matching logic outside the route CRD, it seems a little off because now you have to maintain two CRDs and look at two CRDs, and but then it might not be a big deal either. So
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm trying to remember. I think all our routes right now have an extension ref in match, and the only one this is questioning is HTTP route, right?
yeah, I mean, I'm questioning all the routes, not just HTTP route, because
Okay.
I think we should have uniformity. But routes like TCP route, if you don't have any match criteria right now, and if you remove the extension ref, like the only way you can now do routing is like send all the traffic to from one listener to a route.
Right. Then there's almost nothing to the route, which is, I guess, mostly true with TCP route. Um, hmm. Yeah. Okay. The thing that I've struggled with this as I've thought about it is it's hard to remove it from the other routes, and if we can't remove it from the other routes, it almost feels like it's easier to leave it on HTTP route just for the sake of consistency. With that said, I don't feel very strongly here. I cannot come up with a great example of an extension point for matching in an HTTP route that we don't already handle. I don't know. Anyone else have any preference on this one?
Maybe Harry, can you put some examples there as to both sides? The thing is, like, if you want to implement your own HTTP route, that might be a pretty complicated thing to get right. So if we were to recommend that that's how people extend it, we need to make it easy or not just like a really difficult thing.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
was
if
the
we're going
other
to go
side.
down the path of, sorry, Harry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to confirm. Yeah, that was the other side of it, where adding a new resource is pretty complicated. Like has its life cycle, and then there's like so many things to take care of.
So I think if the working group says you should extend things with your own routes, people are going to run with that, right? There'll be a ingress nginx route type. There'll be a contour HTTP proxy route type. There'll be a lot of I think the result of that will be that there's a lot of fragmentation, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Like fragmentation within the umbrella of gateway is still an improvement over fragmentation without that umbrella.
Yeah, but then if like those are the powerful routes, then we have to think about like how much portability do we have now at that point, right? Which I think is one of the goals of this API.
My vote is currently to not stress that as a way to extend it, just because it's almost like a pretty steep cliff to climb, and also would result in fragmentation almost immediately. But we can see, given feedback, if that is the most reasonable way to go versus something else.
To be clear, which way are you supporting, Boy?
Just immediately having people create their own specific routing CRDs, like a copy of HTTP. That feels like it's going to run into problems pretty quickly for just users to understand and to match behaviors. But yeah, like we need to kind of get some feedback from users and from implementers if it's easy to kind of clone it and then add your own stuff. There might be some things we can do to facilitate it.
I think that is the idea to add custom routes is a really cool part of this API, but it is also kind of that steep cliff you described. Like, it is a dangerous thing to become too common. You really don't want like, or at least I don't think we want to start out with every implementation having all their own custom routes, right? Then you lose the portability. And I know, like, just, we're probably not going to start that way. But I would lean towards starting with more extension points on resources, so there's at least a way to extend, HTTP route matching, whatever that happens to be. And if it turns out that just becomes too painful and everyone just does their custom route, well then, okay, at least we provided another way. And that way would be somewhat portable. So my preference, I think, also would be to lean towards leaving this extension point in for now and see how it's received by the community and if it's used. Because at least leaving this extension point in gives people the ability to extend a route or extend route matching beyond just creating a custom route type.
Yeah, that makes sense, and I agree. That gives at least a point of experimentation and feedback. So let me go ahead and I'll try to add some documentation around it as to why and how an extension point should be used is very important for us to document. I've been running a little behind on contributions, but yeah, let's keep that in, and then I'll update this issue and probably close it out for now.
Okay, sounds good. And I like James' comment here that this is something that could be a very standardized extension point of, I just want to match all GET requests. Like that seems like a great way to experiment with what could start as extended functionality and maybe eventually becomes core. Yeah, so that thanks for adding that example. Okay, I think that covers everything for actually, I don't know if I've actually assigned this to you. Harry, you were volunteering to finish this one up, right?
Yeah, I'll take care of it.
Okay, cool. If anyone feels underwater with something that I have assigned to them or CC'd, just ping me and I can help find someone else or take it on myself. Yeah, but I think that means everything that we are trying to get into V1 Alpha 1 is assigned and accounted for, and feels like we're getting close. Cool. All right. With that said, I wanted to follow up. A lot of people on this call were also at office hours yesterday, and we've kind of been working through this document of different approaches we could take to restricting resource creation, specifically gateway creation by gateway class. The old story of, I've got an external load balancer gateway class and I would rather not expose that to every single namespace in my cluster. I'd rather just have a subset. And so we discussed briefly a few different approaches. One being the approach that we currently have and slight variations on that, using either a selector or list, but something that is an attribute or field on gateway class itself to control this. We also discussed the possibility of using RBAC here. But I wanted to, the others I think are simpler to cover, and I wanted to just take some time quickly here to go through the last 3 potential approaches that I've identified or gotten from feedback. I've run this by a few people from a few different SIGs just to, spread the net wide. I also, sent this out to the SIG network mailing list to see if we could get as much feedback as we possibly could on this. Resource quotas came up because that's 2 things that are very relevant to this use case already use quota. So the way that you restrict service type load balancer is with quota, and the way that storage class solved limiting, how a specific storage class could use be used in a namespace was also quota. So this is an example of how you would, limit the number of load balancers or limit the amount of storage for a given storage class in a namespace. The advantage here is that there's prior art and it's very relevant to what we're doing. The disadvantage is that of the use cases that have used this, at least talking with Saad from SIG Storage, this does not seem like a popular approach. One of the downsides of this is that it is allowing everything by default, and you need to create an entry, a quota entry in every single namespace to explicitly deny, the use of a storage class. And that obviously scales as anyone creates a new namespace, you have to make sure this quota exists here, or else they can use whatever storage class or gateway class they want. So that is a fundamental downside of this approach. The other downside is this all feels very theoretical. I've looked at the implementation of quota, and the attributes that are supported are hard-coded into K/K. And so I don't know that there's any path forward for a set of custom resources to be implemented or supported with quotas, even if we wanted to. We could explore that further, but I'm not sure there's a lot of value in this approach, but it is certainly what other things that are similar to what us have done previously. Option number 4, and feel free to interrupt me at any point if you have feedback, thoughts. The 4th option here came with a gateway class grant. And this one is a suggestion that I think Tim had. And the idea is, well, why can't we just, we want something like RBAC. We need some kind of model like this that's going to scale across all different kinds of class resource. Could we start a new model, a new approach here that would be similar to RBAC, but would grant the use of a class type resource in specific namespaces? So in this case, a gateway class grant, but theoretically this pattern would extend to all class type resources. So in this case, you would drop a gateway class grant resource in a namespace and explicitly allow the use of certain gateway classes in that namespace. A significant downside of an approach like this is, well, it's denied by default, and that's a lot of overhead for users that are used to being able to use all the things. Then all your demos not only have to include a gateway class, a gateway, and a route, they also have to include this kind of gateway class grant. So potentially complex and likely a larger scale project than we can accomplish or solve in V1 Alpha 1. That the whole idea here seems like something, at least to me, that might merit a KEP entirely on its own, because it would be trying to solve authorization for all class type resources in Kubernetes. And finally, the last idea here is to say that we're not going to solve this yet, essentially. That's maybe too strong of a summary here, but to say, this is out of scope for our V1 Alpha 1 API. We want to promote this concept and idea, and instead we'll provide examples of how users could enforce this themselves with, OPA templates, policy config, etc. If they happen to be using a policy agent, we can provide examples of how they could achieve this kind of policy without actually making it core inside our API yet, because we're not quite sure what it should look like inside our API, or if it should live inside our API at all. Yeah, those are the vast array of options presented. I do not love any of them, but I have, as time has gone on, I've gradually started to shift towards this last option of, basically punting on this a little bit and providing a way that is out of tree, at least initially, and continuing to work on a more standardized approach that is going to work for not just us, but other class resources as well. Yes. And James' comment of paralysis of choice, great summary here. I think James added a comment here yesterday that we really could add some templating here that would make this slightly easier to use, but of course, any approach like this has the relatively large dependency of introducing Gatekeeper or similar policy engine into your cluster. So that's where we are on this one. I am increasingly unsure of where we should go, but given, this paralysis of choice, I am rather more hesitant to push an idea that is wholeheartedly wrong than to punt on it and provide this kind of half answer in the V1 Alpha 1 release of you can use this other option to enforce this instead. I don't know, but I know we've already gone over time here, so I don't want to take up too much more of everyone's time, but I'll give just a minute or two if anyone has a preference here of these potential approaches or some other approach we might not have thought of.
So I think my preference, given the options, is probably 5 as well.
Sounds good.
Yep. Let's. Yeah. Since this is like a generic problem, probably end up talking through it with a bunch of SIGs. So
Yeah.
adding our own thing probably isn't super wise at this point.
Yeah, it goes back to a comment that Antoine had at the beginning here that was, basically if we try and cram this into gateway class, we're confusing the purpose of gateway class. And I know we've had similar comments internally as I initially proposed adding this to gateway class, that this is kind of confusing what gateway class is for, muddying the waters. So I unfortunately have come to agree that this may not be something we should solve, at least not in the way that is currently implemented. So I can take this one on to to both remove it and potentially come up with some suggestions for a OPA or policy agent based approach to this in the meantime. Not to say we won't eventually solve this inside our API. It just it feels like there are just a lack of standard options available quite yet. Okay, cool.
Yeah, unfortunately, OPA is not like the most easy to explain, and you don't give the users many guardrails. That's definitely something that I think generally we need to kind of solve, because I think the use case is quite compelling. It's just like if you kick someone out to like, oh, just write a general policy, that's not super satisfying.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with that. This is certainly not the end goal that we want, but it is probably preferable to not add something we're not sure about and to revisit this in time for a V1 Alpha 2 or similar.
Yeah, I think the benefit, so one of the things that Gatekeeper seems to have done well is it's possible for a project to ship with parameterized policies. So we as a project can say, here's a bunch of Gatekeeper policies that you can use, and we've done the Rego implementation for you, and you can, and then operators can just select those and parameterize them. So it takes a lot of the Rego pain out of developing these things.
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense. It does feel like there's a reasonable amount of momentum towards OPA or policy agents in general, but we'll find out, I'm sure, from feedback as we go through this first alpha. Cool. All right. Well, I think we're over time, but thank you everyone for the great feedback here, and we'll talk to you all next week.